Hey everyone! Today we're going to talk about the history of the British Isles and all the wild events they went through. These islands faced serious attacks from Viking raiders, and later they became the target of a huge conquest by the Normans of France. But let's go way back to when these islands were first called Britain, after the Britons who lived there. The Britons were related to a group of people on the mainland called the Gauls. During the time when Rome was building its empire around the Mediterranean, Britain caught their attention. After taking control of Gaul, the Romans added Britain to their empire too. For about 350 years, Britain was ruled by the Romans, enjoying a stable and organized way of life. But eventually, the Roman Empire began to weaken. Germanic tribes started invading Italy, and Rome had to pull its soldiers out of Britain to defend its own borders. This left the Britons on their own, and they weren't ready for it. After so many years of relying on Roman protection, the Britons had forgotten how to defend themselves. So, when tribes from Ireland and Scotland began attacking, they struggled. They even wrote a desperate letter to the Roman commander in Gaul, begging for help. They said, "The barbarians drive us to the sea throws us back on the barbarians. We are either killed or drowned." But the Romans couldn't come to their rescue. On top of that, Germanic raiders known as the Angles and Saxons began arriving in fast ships, attacking the British shores. At one point, the Britons made a risky move. They invited a group of these Germanic raiders to help them fight off their other enemies. This happened in 449 AD, and the Britons promised them great rewards. But once the Angles and Saxons settled in, they decided to take over the land for themselves. Over time, they conquered most of Britain, and the land became known as Angleland, or England. This didn't happen overnight. It took over 200 years of fighting. In the western part of the island, the Britons managed to hold out for a long time. These Western Britons were called Welsh by the newcomers, which meant foreigners. They kept their language, laws, and leaders for hundreds of years. Meanwhile, the Angles and Saxons, who started calling themselves English, set up several small kingdoms. You might know the story about Pope Gregory, who saw English boys being sold as slaves in a Roman market. He was so moved that he sent the monk Augustine to England to spread Christianity. Over time, the English converted to Christianity, became more organized, and united their kingdoms under one ruler. But just as things were getting stable, a new threat appeared: the Vikings, also called Northmen. These fierce warriors attacked with full force, destroying towns, churches, and monasteries. They spread across the island, leaving only the southwest unconquered. That's where they met their match: a young English king named Alfred, who would later be remembered as a hero. Alfred, often called Alfred the Truth-Teller, and England's darling, showed how special he was even as a child. One day, his mother offered him and his brothers a beautifully decorated book, saying she would give it to whoever learned its songs first. Alfred, fascinated by the colorful writing and designs, worked hard with his teacher and learned the verses before his brothers. He won the book, showing his love for learning and his quick mind, traits that would define his life. When Alfred became king, his first 7 years were filled with battles against the Vikings. At one point, things got so bad that he had to hide in a herdsman's hut in the swamps. There's a famous story about how the herdsman's wife scolded him for letting some cakes burn while she was baking. She didn't know he was the king. According to an old song, she said, "Can't you mind the cakes, man? Don't you see they're burning? I'm sure you'll eat them quick enough once they're ready." In the end, Alfred rallied his people and defeated the Vikings in a major battle. He even made their king agree to peace. After that, Alfred focused on improving life for his people. He worked on education and helped rebuild the kingdom. And after King Alfred's time, England enjoyed some stability under strong rulers. But eventually, weaker kings took the throne, and that gave the Northmen another chance to raid and cause chaos. Then came Canute, the king of Denmark and Norway. He invaded England and won, becoming king of the whole land. Canute turned out to be a surprisingly strong and capable ruler. For nearly 20 years he kept things in order. By this point, the Northmen were no longer the wild, destructive warriors they had been. They had become Christians, and were much more civilized, which made Canute's rule more peaceful compared to earlier invasions. But after Canute died, things fell apart again. His sons, who ruled after him, weren't fit to lead, and their time on the throne didn't last long. Eventually, the throne went back to an English king named Edward, also known as Edward the Confessor. While Edward was well-meaning, he wasn't a strong leader. He had a Norman mother and had spent part of his life in Normandy, where the descendants of the Northmen had become a powerful and advanced group in France. Edward loved the Normans and brought many of them to England, giving them important jobs and showing them a lot of favoritism. This upset the English nobles and caused a lot of tension. When Edward died in 1066 without having any children, there was a big question about who should take the throne. The English nobles decided on Harold, a strong and respected nobleman who had been leading the fight against the Normans' growing influence. But Harold's claim to the throne didn't go unchallenged. Across the English Channel, Duke William of Normandy believed he had a right to the crown. William claimed that Edward had promised him the throne during a visit to England. He also said that Harold had sworn an oath not to take the throne himself. Using this as his excuse, William raised a massive army of Normans and Frenchmen, got the Pope's blessing, and sailed to England to fight for the crown. The two sides met at a place called Senlac Hill, near Hastings. Harold and his English army were ready, and for a while it seemed like they might win. The Normans couldn't break through their defenses. William even had 3 horses killed under him during the battle, and at one point, a rumor spread that he had been killed. This caused some of his soldiers to panic and retreat, but William took off his helmet so they could see him and shouted, "I'm alive, and with God's help we'll win." William then came up with a clever plan. He told his men to pretend to run away, hoping to trick the English soldiers into leaving their strong position to chase after them. The plan worked partially, but the battle was still fierce. Finally, William tried a new tactic. He ordered his archers to shoot their arrows high into the air. One of those arrows hit Harold in the eye, killing him. With Harold gone, the English army fell apart, and the Normans won the battle. After that, William took control of the kingdom and became King of England. History remembers him as William the Conqueror. His victory changed everything. The Normans brought their own culture, laws, and ways of governing, leaving a huge impact on England. From William's time on, every king or queen of England has been one of his descendants. This conquest wasn't just a big deal for William. It was one of the most important events of the Middle Ages.